Where are they now? Sitcom Stars, The People We Let Into Our Living Rooms, written by Barron Darby, narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart. A note on this book. There is a particular kind of intimacy that only television built. Movie stars we admired from a distance, up on a screen the size of a building, gods for an evening. But the sitcom people came to us. They came into the room where we ate dinner. They came in on a Tuesday or a Thursday at the same hour every week, and for 22 minutes they lived with us. We knew the sound of their front door. We knew which chair was theirs. We knew the face they made right before the joke landed, and we loved them the way you love someone whose habits you have memorized without trying. That is the strange contract of the situation comedy. The actors agreed to be family to millions of people who would never meet them, and we agreed to freeze them there forever at the age and in the apartment where we found them. This book is about what happened after the room went dark, after the last laugh track faded and the set was struck and the actor drove home to a life we never saw. Some of them climbed higher than anyone dreamed. Some of them spent decades trying to convince the world they were more than the one face it adored. Some of them are gone now, and we will sit with them gently. All of them gave us something we still carry. Everything here is drawn from the public record. It is told with affection and with restraint, because these were real people, and the point of asking where are they now is not to catch anyone falling. It is to say thank you and to find out how the story turned out. Let's go back to the living room. Introduction: the strangers who raised us. Picture the light, not the daylight outside, but the other light, the blue-gray flicker that came alive at 7 or 8 o'clock and painted the walls of 10,000 rooms the same color at the same time. A whole country leaning toward the same glow, laughing on cue at the same instant, together and completely alone. For a few decades in the back half of the 20th century, the sitcom was the closest thing America had to a shared hearth. You did not have to choose it from a menu of 500 things. It arrived, and the people inside it became, without anyone quite deciding it, a second family, funnier than your own, and considerably better lit. Here's the trick of it, the thing that makes this book both a comedy and, quietly, an elegy. We met these people when they were young, or at least younger, and we decided that was who they were forever. The actor could go on to win an Oscar, bury a spouse, beat a disease, reinvent himself 3 times over, and still, when he walked through an airport, a stranger would grin and call him by the name of a character he stopped playing 40 years ago. That is a gift, and it is a weight. Some of them wore it lightly. Some of them wrestled it their whole lives. A few of them set it down and walked away from fame entirely, toward God, or a quiet ranch, or a magic shop in New Orleans. So we are going to knock on some doors. We are going to start in the loud, groundbreaking living rooms of the 1970s, when the sitcom grew up and started telling the truth. We will move through the golden 1980s, when the bar and the boarding school and the shoe store became the most visited addresses in the country. We will crowd onto the couch for the must-see 1990s, and we will end at the turn of the century and with the people we have lost. And at every stop, we will ask the only question that matters here, the one that has been sitting in the back of your mind since the theme song started. Whatever happened to them? Let's find out. The loud, honest living rooms of the 1970s. But before we step into any living room, we have to stand for a moment at the door itself and for the woman who opened it. Diahann Carroll, in 1968, on a television landscape that had only ever allowed black women onto the screen as maids and servants. A glamorous, elegant woman walked into her own show as the star and quietly changed what the medium believed was possible. Diahann Carroll played Julia Baker, a widowed nurse raising a son alone, a professional woman with dignity and a good job and a real life. And the mere fact of her, front and center, week after week, was a revolution disguised as a gentle comedy. She was the first African-American woman to headline her own network series in a role that was not a domestic, and she carried the enormous weight of that first with grace, even as some critics complained the show was too soft, too apolitical for a turbulent time. She knew what she was carrying. She carried it anyway, because someone had to walk through first, so that everyone in this book could follow. Diahann Carroll went on to an Oscar-nominated film career and a scene-stealing run as television's first black diva on a glossy nighttime soap, and she never stopped being a pioneer. She died in the autumn of 2019 at 84 after a long fight with cancer. Every black sitcom star you are about to meet, every one of them, walked through a door that she pushed open first. We start here with her because that is where the story starts. Always honor the first. Now, into the decade she helped make possible. The decade opened with a chair, an ugly, overstuffed wing chair, planted in a row house in Queens, and in it, a man who said the things you were not supposed to say out loud. All in the Family did not tiptoe into television. It kicked the door in. And around that chair, a family of actors became the most watched people in America. Start with the man in the chair. Carroll O'Connor. He was, in real life, a cultured, liberal, Irish-American gentleman with a graduate degree, and he became immortal by playing his own exact opposite so convincingly that half the country thought he was serious. As Archie Bunker, Carroll O'Connor created one of the most important characters in the history of the medium, a working-class bigot bellowing from his throne at a world that was changing faster than he could stand. And the miracle of the performance was that O'Connor never let Archie become a mere villain. He found the fear under the prejudice, the wounded, bewildered decency under the ugliness, and in doing so he held a mirror up to an entire nation and dared it to laugh and wince at the same time. He won 4 Emmys and then, remarkably, reinvented himself yet again in a later career as a Southern police chief in a very different kind of drama, proving the range that Archie had always concealed. Carroll O'Connor died in the summer of 2001 at 76. He spent his last years as an advocate against drug addiction after the loss of his son, speaking with the same fierce honesty he brought to everything. He took the least sympathetic man on television and made him human, and in the argument that raged around that chair week after week, America worked out loud through its own worst self. No one else could have played him. No one has since. Now, the daughter, Sally Struthers. She is 22 years old, and she is crying and laughing at the same time, which is the hardest thing an actor can do, and she is doing it in front of 40 million people. As Gloria Stivic, Sally Struthers had the job nobody notices until it is gone. She was the heart in the middle of the shouting match, the tenderness that made Archie Bunker's bigotry bearable to watch, the bridge between the old man in the chair and the long-haired son-in-law on the couch. 2 Emmys came of it. So did a kind of typecasting that would have flattened a lesser talent. What most people remember next is the other role, the one that was not a role at all. For years, Struthers looked into the camera on behalf of hungry children overseas, and her voice cracking over those images became its own cultural fixture, so ubiquitous that comedians made a running joke of it. She let them. She kept doing the work anyway, because the checks were real and the children were real, and a punchline was a small price to pay. Then she did the smartest thing a former sitcom star can do. She went back to the theater, where nobody freezes you in time, where you are only as good as tonight's performance. And she worked. Musicals, regional stages, road companies, decades of them. Where is she now? Still going at 78 and busier than actors half her age. She turned up recurring on a warm Netflix comedy in its second season in late 2025, and she keeps a theater schedule that would exhaust a marathon runner. She is, as the tributes now note, the last of the primary, all in the family cast still with us, which makes her something like the keeper of that famous flame. She wears it well. She always did the quiet, difficult work of being the heart. It turns out she was practicing for the long run. There is a particular grace in how she carried the parody, if you think about it. Imagine spending years doing sincere, unglamorous work on behalf of hungry children and having the culture repay you by turning your tearful appeals into a national punchline. A more brittle person would have quit, or grown bitter, or demanded to be taken seriously. Struthers just kept showing up. For the children, and for the plays, and for the fans at the stage door, letting the world laugh if it needed to, doing the work either way. That is a specific kind of toughness that looks from the outside exactly like softness. It is the toughness of people who know why they are doing what they do. Jean Stapleton. To understand what Jean Stapleton did, you have to understand what she refused to do. She played Edith Bunker, and Edith was on paper a joke. The dingbat, the fluttering off-key wife her husband bellowed at from the good chair. In lesser hands, she would have been wallpaper, a setup machine. Stapleton, a serious woman of the theater, took that thin outline and poured a whole soul into it. Her Edith was innocent, but never stupid, patient, but never weak, and in the show's bravest hours she carried its heaviest material with a grace that stopped the laughter cold and left the room holding its breath. 3 Emmys tried to measure it. They fell short. And then she walked away, on purpose, at the height of it, because she did not want to spend the rest of her life being one woman, however beloved, and she had stages to return to. Jean Stapleton died in the spring of 2013, at 90 at home in Manhattan, surrounded by family. She left behind a lesson that half the people in this book would spend their lives learning, that the role is not the actor, and the truest thing you can do with a beloved character is have the courage to set her down and remain gloriously yourself. Rob Reiner. He spent 5 seasons losing arguments in that Queen's living room, and he made losing look like the future. As Michael Stivic, the son-in-law Archie could never quite forgive for existing, Rob Reiner was the voice of a changing country, planted directly across the dinner table from the voice of the old one. Meathead, Archie called him, and the name stuck to Reiner the way these names do. 2 Emmys, a face the whole nation recognized, and a trap most young actors never escape, to be permanently the kid in the argument. Reiner escaped it more completely than almost anyone ever has. He walked behind the camera, and it turned out the young man who had spent all those years thinking about how a scene should feel knew exactly how to build one. What he built is almost unfair to list in a single breath. A mock documentary about a hapless rock band that became the most quoted comedy of its kind. A tender film about boys walking down a railroad track that made a generation ache for its own lost summers. A fairy tale so beloved that its lines are still traded like passwords. A romance set to the seasons of New York that redrew the whole genre. A courtroom drama that gave an actor the most famous demand in modern film. He directed all of them. The meathead became one of the finest storytellers his industry produced, and he did it by trusting the audience to feel. Rob Reiner died in December of 2025. His final film had reached theaters only months before. When Hollywood gathered for its highest ceremony the following spring, the room stood for him, and the actors who had lived inside his movies came out from the wings to stand together in his memory, because that is what you do for the person who gave you the scene of your life. We will leave the circumstances where they belong, with his family and with the law. What belongs to us, the people who watched, is the work, and the work is a staggering, generous, permanent gift. He came into our living room as a punchline and left as one of the great American directors. Remember him that way. He earned it twice. Loretta Swit. The camp was fictional. The war was fictional. The tears, by the end, were not. Loretta Swit reported for duty as Margaret Houlihan, and the nickname the writers hung on her in the early years was not kind and was not meant to be. She was a punchline in heels, the uptight foil to a tent full of wisecracking surgeons. But Sweet did something across 11 seasons that almost never happens on television. She refused to let her character stay a joke. Season by season, she pushed and argued and insisted until Margaret became a full human being, a woman of competence and loneliness and hard-won dignity, and the show grew up alongside her. 2 Emmys marked the transformation. The bigger reward was that an entire generation stopped laughing at Margaret and started rooting for her. Loretta Swit died in the spring of 2025 at 87 at her home in New York. She spent her later decades painting and writing and giving her time to animals, quietly, without fuss. She had taken a character written to be small and through sheer will made her large. That is not a bad thing to leave behind. Alan Alda. He was the sharpest scalpel in the tent and the softest heart. And for 11 years he made a comedy about a war feel like the truest thing on television. As Hawkeye Pierce, Alan Alda played a surgeon who joked without stopping because the alternative was to fall apart. A man whose wisecracks were a kind of triage for his own soul. It was one of the great sustained performances in the history of the medium, funny and furious and humane. And Alda kept deepening it as the show grew braver, until an ensemble comedy about a field hospital was quietly saying the hardest things anyone on television dared to say about violence and loss. He won Emmys as an actor, a writer, and a director, the only person ever to manage all 3 for the same series, and then he simply kept working into the halls of prestige drama and film. And then, in his 80s, he did the thing that has come to define his final act. Diagnosed with Parkinson's, he went public not to be pitied, but to be useful, talking openly about the tremor and about the face blindness that makes it hard for him to recognize the people he loves, treating each new limitation, he says, like a little puzzle to solve. Where is he now? Nearly 90, and irrepressibly curious, hosting a podcast about how human beings actually talk to one another, and even turning up in a warm, streaming remake of one of his own old films. He has called managing the disease almost a full-time job, and then added, because he cannot help himself, that it keeps him looking for the funny side. Of course it does. It always did. John Amos. He had a face built for a certain kind of role, the strong father, the man who works 2 jobs and swallows his pride and keeps the family together by force of will. John Amos filled that outline so completely that he became a symbol of it. As James Evans on Good Times, he was the proud, exhausted, deeply loving patriarch of a family scraping by in a Chicago high-rise, and his insistence that the show honor that struggle rather than clown it cost him the role in the end. He would not soften the truth for a laugh. Then he walked into the American memory a second time, aging into the adult Kunta Kintean roots in a performance that seared itself into the national conscience. John Amos died in the summer of 2024 at 84. The news reached the public that October. He worked steadily to the end, a respected elder of the craft. He spent a career playing men of enormous dignity, and he came by it honestly. Jimmy Walker. For one white-hot stretch of the 1970s, a single word could bring down a house, and Jimmy Walker owned it. As J.J. Evans, all elbows and grin and impossible energy, Walker turned a catchphrase into a national event. Children shouted it on playgrounds. It went on lunchboxes. His fame, briefly, outran the show that made it, and that is a dangerous place for an actor to stand, because a phenomenon that big tends to swallow everything else you might want to be. Walker made a clear-eyed choice about who he was. He was a stand-up comedian, first and always, and when the sitcom ended, he went back to the road and simply never left it. Where is he now? Still out there, at 78, still working clubs, still delivering the famous word on cue when an audience needs it. Decades deep into one of the more durable stand-up careers in the business. He never confused the character for himself, and so the character never trapped him. He just kept telling jokes for a living, which is all he ever wanted to do. Marla Gibbs. She was working as a reservations agent for an airline when the sitcom found her, and she did not quit the day job right away because she had seen how show business treats people, and she was nobody's fool. As Florence the housekeeper on the Jeffersons, Marla Gibbs walked into a room ruled by the loudest man on television and, week after week, out-timed him. Her dry, unbothered put-downs of George Jefferson were small masterpieces of comic patience, the maid who was plainly smarter than her employer and in no hurry to hide it. 5 Emmy nominations followed a woman who had come to acting late and made it look like she had been born to it. And here is the wonderful part. Where is she now? Still here and still working, past 90, sharp as ever. She collected a major legacy honor from Hollywood, and she has been preparing a memoir whose title tells you everything about her temperament, a cheerful insistence that it is never too late. She proved it with her own life. She is a living rebuke to every young person who thinks the door closes at a certain age. For Marla Gibbs, the door was just getting warmed up. Sherman Hemsley and Isabel Sanford. Upstairs from that housekeeper's dry wit lived a couple who had, in the words of the theme, finally moved on up, and in doing so, they became one of the most important households in television history. Sherman Hemsley played George Jefferson as a small man with an enormous strut, a self-made, sharp-elbowed, gloriously arrogant businessman who had clawed his way to a deluxe apartment in the sky. At a time when television almost never showed black wealth or black ambition without apology, George Jefferson swaggered across the screen as a proud, prickly, prosperous man, and audiences of every background adored him for it. Beside him stood Isabel Sanford as his wife Louise, the warm, grounded, unbothered center of gravity who kept his ego from floating away entirely. And in 1981, Sanford made history, becoming the first African-American woman ever to win the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series, a genuine first and long overdue. They are both gone now. Isabel Sanford died in the summer of 2004 at 86. Sherman Hemsley followed in 2012 at 74. Their show ran for a remarkable 11 seasons and featured, among other quiet revolutions, one of television's first interracial married couples living next door, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, which was, of course, exactly the point. They moved on up, and they took a good part of the culture with them.
Sanford and Son.
Down at street level, in a cluttered Los Angeles junkyard, an old man was clutching his chest and calling out to his late wife in heaven, and a nation was howling with laughter. Red Fox played Fred Sanford, the cantankerous, scheming junk dealer whose signature move was a theatrical fake heart attack whenever life did not go his way. Fox was already a legend of the stand-up circuit, a comedian famous for material far too blue for television, and part of the electricity of the show was watching that raucous, streetwise energy smuggled into millions of living rooms. Beside him, Demond Wilson played his patient, long-suffering son Lamont, the straight man holding the whole ramshackle operation together. Their stories ended very differently, and both are now closed. Red Fox died in 1991, at 68, of a real heart attack, poignantly enough while at work on another sitcom set. Demond Wilson took a very different road. He walked away from Hollywood almost entirely, became an ordained minister, and spent decades founding a ministry to rehabilitate former prisoners, before passing away in the winter of 2026, at 79, the last of the show's main cast. One man played a con artist and one played his conscience, and in the end, the conscience went off to save souls. Marion Ross. Every generation elects a television mother, and for a long, gentle run, the job belonged to Marion Ross. As Marion Cunningham, presiding over the kitchen in a scrubbed clean vision of the 1950s, she was warmth itself, the mom the whole country wished had packed its lunches. It was easy to underrate the work, because good warmth looks effortless, and it never is. She anchored that house for a decade and let a generation of louder characters bounce off her steadiness. Where is she now? She turned 97 in the autumn of 2025, and as recently as a couple of years ago, she was still lending her voice to a cartoon grandmother for a new batch of children who have no idea they are hearing America's mom. She has settled into the role of grande dame with the same grace she brought to the kitchen table. Some people are simply built to make a room feel safe. She was one of them, on camera, and, by every account, off it. Henry Winkler. He put on a leather jacket, snapped his fingers, and became so cool that he nearly swallowed the entire show whole, and then he spent the next 40 years learning how to be something better than cool. As the Fonz on that same nostalgic hangout, Henry Winkler was a genuine phenomenon, a greaser demigod on lunchboxes and bedroom walls, a supporting character who became the most famous person on television, and that kind of lightning is usually a trap. For years afterward, the industry could see only the jacket, and Winkler, a warm and thoughtful man who privately struggled with severe dyslexia his whole life, quietly refused to curdle about it. He directed, he produced, and most movingly, he became a wildly successful author of children's books about a boy with learning struggles, just like his own. Work that has helped more kids than the Fonz ever could. And then, late, the reward arrived. Cast as a vain, wounded acting teacher in a pitch-black cable comedy, Winkler finally won the Emmy that had eluded him for half a century and stood on that stage in tears, beloved. Where is he now? an elder statesman in full bloom, inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, a best-selling memoirist, still turning out children's books deep into his career, still telling graduating classes to find their gift and give it away. The kid who could barely read became one of publishing's most reliable authors, and the coolest man on television became something rarer, the kindest. That trade was a bargain. Ron Howard. At the center of that same wholesome show stood a freckled redhead, being pleasant while he quietly memorized how the whole machine worked. Ron Howard played Richie Cunningham, the decent, every boy heart of the series. And while the audience watched Richie, Howard was watching the directors, storing away every choice, because he had already decided that acting was not the job he wanted for life. So he did something almost unheard of. At the height of his fame, he walked away from being on camera to stand behind it. And it worked beyond any reasonable dream. He became one of the most successful and respected directors in the world, the man behind Stranded Astronauts and Beautiful Minds, winning the Academy's highest honor and building a body of work that will outlast every sitcom he ever appeared in. Where is he now? Still directing, tirelessly, with new films and documentaries in the pipeline and a fresh project premiering at the world's most prestigious festival. He never looked back, and he never got bitter, and he turned the friendliest face of 1970s television into a durable, distinguished career on the other side of the lens. Some people use a hit show as a destination. He used it as a film school, and then he graduated. The Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family. For a certain slice of the 1970s, wholesomeness itself was a genre, and two blended musical families ruled it, selling a sunlit vision of American home life that millions of kids desperately wanted to believe in. On one channel, there was the Brady household, that groovy split level with the famous staircase, presided over by Florence Henderson as Carol Brady, the serene and impossibly patient mother who became a national symbol of maternal calm. Henderson lived a long, warm, public life as America's mom before she died in 2016 at 82, and the eldest Brady son, Barry Williams, is very much still with us, having long ago made his peace with being called Greg for the rest of his life. Where is he now? Cheerfully leaning all the way in, touring in stage shows, recording video greetings for fans, hosting a podcast with his television brother, and turning up on reality television, a man entirely at home inside his own nostalgia. On the other channel, there was the Partridge Clan, piling into a psychedelic bus, anchored by Shirley Jones as the singing widowed mother. And here is a delicious secret, the bubblegum show, never advertised. Shirley Jones was already an Academy Award winner, an actress of genuine range slumming gloriously in a family sitcom. Where is she now? Alive and well into her 90s, a grande dame of a vanished Hollywood. Her television stepson, the teen idol David Cassidy, did not fare as gently. The screaming fame of those years exacted a long and painful toll, and he died in 2017. Two sunny families, and behind the sunshine the full complicated range of real life, which is the thread that runs through this entire book. Suzanne Summers. She was the blonde the whole country underestimated, and she spent the rest of her life proving that underestimating her was a mistake. As Chrissy Snow, Suzanne Summers played Dizzy so convincingly that people forgot it was a performance, which is precisely the problem with playing Dizzy well. Then she did something that, at the time, was almost unheard of for a woman on a hit show. She looked at the money the men around her were making, and she asked for parity, and when the studio said no, it cost her the job. She was written off the biggest comedy on television for the crime of knowing her worth. Most careers do not survive that. Hers detonated into something bigger. She became, of all things, a mogul, selling a simple exercise gadget through the television screen with such relentless charm that she moved tens of millions of them. And she turned herself into a best-selling author on health and aging besides. The ditzy blonde built an empire in plain sight, while the industry was still congratulating itself for firing her. Look closely at the shape of that fight, because it is the whole woman in miniature. She asked to be paid what the men were paid, and the industry decided it would rather lose her than say yes, and it fully expected her to vanish as punishment. Instead, she went and built something the industry could not touch, an empire of her own, and she did it by selling directly to the very audience that had loved her all along, cutting out every gatekeeper who had underestimated her. The blonde they thought was dim had done the math better than any of them. She turned being fired into being free. Suzanne Summers died in the autumn of 2023 at 76. She had lived with breast cancer for more than 2 decades, quietly and on her own fierce terms. She spent her life being called a lightweight by people who never once caught up to her. The joke, in the end, was never on her. John Ritter. Watch him fall down. No, really watch it frame by frame, because it is one of the great forgotten athletic feats of American television. John Ritter, as Jack Tripper, could trip over a coffee table and turn it into ballet. He inherited a gift that runs straight back to the silent clowns, the ability to make his whole body a punchline while keeping his face sweetly, hopelessly sincere. It won him an Emmy and the affection of a country, and it made a hard thing look weightless, which is the entire art of it. He was, by every account of everyone who worked with him, one of the kindest men the business ever produced. John Ritter died in the autumn of 2003 at 54, struck down by a flaw in his heart that no one had caught, on a day when he was at work, doing the thing he loved, on a new show, making people laugh right up until he could not. The loss still lands hard, because he was so young and so beloved, and so plainly in the middle of the story. And it is worth saying plainly what everyone who knew him says, because it is the part that outlives the pratfalls. In an industry that does not require it, John Ritter was kind. Co-stars, crew, strangers, children. He treated them all with the same open, generous warmth, remembered their names, asked about their lives. The physical comedy was the showpiece, the thing that won the awards. But the people who worked beside him talk less about the falls than about the man who caught everyone else. That is why the loss still lands so hard all these years later. We did not just lose a great clown, we lost one of the good ones. We do not get to know the rest of it. We only get the gift he already gave, which was the sight of a good man falling down on purpose to make us happy. Judd Hirsch. The garage was full of dreamers, and somebody had to be the grown-up. On Taxi, Judd Hirsch played Alex Rieger, the one cab driver who had made peace with the fact that this was the job, not the waiting room for a better one. He was the moral center, the still point, the man everyone else's chaos bounced off of, and Hirsch anchored that famous ensemble with a lived-in weariness that earned him 2 Emmys and the trust of every actor in the room. Then he simply refused to stop. This is the whole story of Judd Hirsch, and it is a marvel. Decades after the garage closed, he was still working, and not coasting either, collecting Oscar nominations across a span of more than 40 years, the second of them arriving when he was in his late 70s. Where is he now? 91 years old, and still turning up on network television, still hitting his marks, still doing the work. He is proof of a stubborn, beautiful idea, that an actor is not a moment but a lifetime, and that if you love it enough, you never have to leave. Danny DeVito. From inside a metal cage in the middle of that same garage, a small man with a large sneer was quietly stealing the entire show. Danny DeVito played Louis De Palma, the dispatcher, the troll under the bridge, a character so gleefully awful that he should have been unwatchable and was instead unforgettable. It won DeVito an Emmy, and it launched one of the least likely and most durable careers in Hollywood. He became a movie star at a height studios said was impossible for a leading man. He became a director. He became a producer. And then, when a whole new generation might never have met him, he strolled into a filthy Philadelphia bar on a cult comedy and became, improbably, an icon all over again to people who were not born when Taxi aired. Consider the arithmetic of it, because it is genuinely absurd. There is a generation that knows him only as the venomous dispatcher in the cage. There is a generation that knows him only as a movie star, the penguin dragging himself out of the sewer, the twin who was supposed to be Schwarzenegger. There is a generation that knows him only as the depraved little goblin of that Philadelphia bar, day drinking in a filthy jumpsuit. And there is a generation of small children who know him only as the singing voice of a lovable cartoon. 4 completely separate fames, stacked one on top of the other, each earned fresh, each belonging to people who barely know the others exist. Most actors would kill for one of those. He simply refused to stop acquiring them. Where is he now? Right where he wants to be, still playing the most degenerate man on television on a show that refuses to end, beloved across at least 3 generations, and honored not long ago at a reunion of his old cab company family. Most sitcom stars spend their lives trying to escape the shadow of one great role. Danny DeVito just kept collecting more of them. He is, in the truest sense, bigger than ever. Howard Hesseman. Before the airwaves went corporate, there was a certain kind of radio voice, loose and knowing, and half submerged in smoke, and Howard Hesseman made it flesh as Dr. Johnny Fever, the burned-out disc jockey at a hapless Cincinnati station. Hesseman played a man who had already had his brush with the big time and blown it, and who now presided over the overnight shift with the rumpled cool of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. It was a beautifully specific performance, a whole lost counterculture compressed into one guy behind a microphone, and he later carried his own show as a teacher of gifted misfits. Howard Hesseman died in the winter of 2022 at 81 of complications following surgery. He had spent his early years in the actual counterculture he would later play so well, which is why it never felt like a costume. Some actors reach for authenticity. He just remembered. Lonnie Anderson. She walked into that same struggling radio station as a joke the writers had planned, and walked out having quietly rewritten it. Lonnie Anderson was cast as Jennifer Marlowe, the glamorous receptionist, and the expectation attached to that job in 1978 was obvious and small. Anderson refused it. Her Jennifer was the most competent person in the building, a woman who understood exactly the effect she had on people and used it like a scalpel, always 3 moves ahead of the men who thought they were in charge. It was a sly, feminist little performance smuggled inside a network sitcom, and it earned her Golden Globe nominations and a permanent place in the decade's memory. Lonnie Anderson died in the summer of 2025 at 79, just days short of her 80th birthday. She had spent her life being looked at, and had spent her career insisting there was a mind behind the image. There always was. The receptionist was the smartest one in the room, and so, it turned out, was the woman who played her, Valerie Bertinelli. She was America's daughter before she was old enough to vote, the sweet teenage face at the center of a quietly revolutionary show about a divorced mother raising 2 girls on her own. As Barbara on that groundbreaking single-mother comedy, Valerie Bertinelli grew up in front of the whole country, and it was the kind of wholesome fame that can be very hard to grow out of. Her life off-screen was its own long public story, including a famous rock and roll marriage, and in time, a very public loss. But her second act is the one worth landing on, because she reinvented herself completely, trading the soundstage for the kitchen and becoming, for years, one of the most beloved hosts on cable, warm and unpretentious and genuinely happy to be there. And then that chapter closed too, the way chapters do, when the network moved on without her. Where is she now? Doing exactly what she has always done, which is refuse to disappear, launching her own cooking ventures on her own platform, on her own terms, no network required. She is a study in durability, a person who has been famous for something different in nearly every decade of her life, and who keeps finding the next room to walk into. The sweet kid grew into a resilient woman. The face changed. The refusal to quit never did. An interlude. The trick of the frozen face. Here is something strange to sit with before we move on. Every person we have just visited is, or was, a fully formed human being with 70 or 80 or 90 years of life. Childhoods, marriages, losses, whole interior worlds. And yet, for most of us, each of them exists primarily as a single frozen frame, a face captured at one age in one apartment, delivering one kind of joke. We did that, not cruelly, lovingly even, but we did it. We met them at their most vivid, and we pinned them there, like a photograph in a locket, and then we were faintly startled every time the real person aged, or changed, or died, as though they had broken a promise they never made. This is the quiet ache underneath every "where are they now?" It is not really a question about them. It is a question about time, and about us, and about the odd tenderness of having let strangers become furniture in the rooms of our lives. When we ask what happened to them, we are also asking what happened to the version of ourselves that watched, on that couch, in that light, before we knew how the story would go. Keep that in your pocket. We are about to walk into the 1980s, and the living rooms are about to get very crowded and very famous indeed. The golden bars and boarding schools of the 1980s. If the 70s kicked the door in, the 80s moved in and hung curtains. The sitcom stopped shocking us and started comforting us. It gave us places we wanted to live, a bar where they knew our name, a house full of wisecracking women who refused to fade, a sunny living room where the biggest movie star in the world was pretending to be a teenager. These were the golden addresses. Let's visit the people who lived there. Ted Danson. He was almost too handsome for the job, and that turned out to be the joke. As Sam Malone, the ex-ball player tending bar in a Boston basement, Ted Danson played vanity as vulnerability, a former athlete whose glory days were behind him, and who knew it, charming the whole room to keep from looking at the emptiness underneath. For more than a decade, he made that bar the place America most wanted to spend a half hour, and it would have been easy for Danson to coast on the grin for the rest of his life. Instead, he became one of the great second-act artists in television history, and he did it by aging on purpose, gracefully, into wiser and stranger roles, a neurotic novelist, a slippery lawyer, and gloriously, a demon learning to be good in a comedy about the afterlife that gave him the finest work of his career at an age when most stars are being handed lifetime achievement plaques and shown the door. There is a lesson buried in his whole career, and it runs against everything Hollywood usually preaches. The town tells you to fear age, to fight it, to freeze yourself at the moment of peak heat. Danson did the opposite. He let the silver come into his hair and treated it as an asset. He took roles that made fun of his own vanity, that used his handsomeness as a punchline rather than a shield. He kept choosing writers who were smarter than the material required, and directors who wanted something odd from him. And by the time he was in his 70s, he was doing the most surprising and tender work of his entire life, playing a man in a retirement community with the lightness of an actor half his age. Where is he now? Thriving, plainly and enviably. He is leading a hit streaming comedy that keeps getting renewed. He collected a major career honor named for Carol Burnett, and he hosts a podcast where he and an old friend sit around telling stories about the bar. He is the rare sitcom star who never had a wilderness to wander back from because he simply kept getting better. Sam Malone was afraid of getting old. Ted Danson made it look like the best part. George went. He had, arguably, the easiest job on television, and it was one of the hardest to do well. George Wendt played Norm, and Norm's entire function was to walk through the door of that bar so the whole room could shout his name back at him. That was the bit. A man, a bar stool, a greeting, a dry one-liner about his marriage or his beer. 6 years running, the industry nominated him for an Emmy, because what looked like doing nothing was in fact a master class in comic timing and warmth. The art of being so completely at home that the audience felt at home too. Norm was the friend who was always there, and Wendt made always being there feel like a gift. George Wendt died in the spring of 2025 at 76. The tributes came from every corner, because everyone, it turned out, had felt personally welcomed by him. He spent a decade making a bar stool into the coziest seat in America. When we say we want a place where everybody knows our name, it is his face we are picturing in the corner, glass raised, glad we came. Kirstie Alley. She had the impossible task of replacing someone the audience adored, and she did it by being nothing like her. When Kirstie Alley took over as the anxious, striving bar manager Rebecca Howe, she inherited a show already beloved and a chair still warm from a departed star. Rather than imitate, she reinvented, playing a woman perpetually one bad decision away from disaster, all frazzled ambition and comic desperation, and she won an Emmy for it. She carried that famous bar into its final years and then floated off into movies where she talked to babies, and audiences followed. Kirstie Alley died in December of 2022 at 71 of cancer that had been caught too late. Her later years were loud and sometimes contentious, lived out in public in ways that divided people. We will let all of that rest. What we will keep is the actress, fearless, funny, willing to look ridiculous in service of a laugh, a woman who walked into an impossible job and made it unmistakably her own. Michael J. Fox. He was a hippie couple's worst nightmare and America's favorite kid, all at once. And he was already carrying something none of us could see. As Alex Keaton on Family Ties, Michael J. Fox played a briefcase-toting young capitalist raised by aging flower children, and the culture fell for him so hard that a supporting teenager became the show's gravitational center. At the exact same time, he climbed into a certain silver sports car and became the biggest young movie star on Earth. It was a run of fame so total, it should have been the whole story. It was not. In 1991, not yet 30, Fox was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. He kept it private for years, kept working, and then made a decision that redefined him more completely than any role. He stepped toward the thing that frightened everyone, founded a research organization, and turned himself into the most effective advocate his cause has ever had, helping to raise billions of dollars in the hunt for a cure. Think about the timing of it, because the cruelty of the timing is the whole point. Here was a young man who had, by any measure, won. The hit show and the hit movie at the same moment. The convertible fame of being 20-something and adored on 2 screens at once. And into that perfect picture came a diagnosis that most people associate with the very old, delivered to a man not yet 30, quietly, in a doctor's office, while the world outside still thought he had everything. He could have hidden. For a while, understandably, he did. And then he made the choice that turned a private catastrophe into a public gift, walking straight toward the disease with his name and his likability and his refusal to be pitied, and building something that has moved real money and real hope into the search for an answer. Where is he now? Still here, still funny, still refusing self-pity with a stubbornness that looks a lot like grace. Not long ago, the nation's highest civilian honor was placed around his neck, and he keeps turning up when his body allows to remind everyone that a life can be full and joyful and unfinished all at once. He was the kid who wanted to grow up fast. He grew into one of the bravest men his industry has produced. Betty White and the girls on the lanai. 4 women sat around a kitchen table in Miami, eating cheesecake in the middle of the night, saying the unsayable about age and sex and death and friendship, and a generation that television had written off leaned in and loved them for it. The Golden Girls did something radical by making its heroines older women, and then refusing to treat that as a limitation. B. Arthur's towering, sardonic Dorothy, Rue McClanahan's shameless, warm-hearted Blanche, Estelle Getty's tiny, merciless Sophia, firing off insults from beneath a wicker purse, and Betty White's Rose, sweet and dim, and secretly the show's soft center, telling her endless, pointless stories from the old country until you loved her helplessly. It is hard now to overstate how quietly radical that show was. Television is an industry organized almost entirely around youth, forever chasing the young and quietly retiring the old. And here came a comedy that put 4 women past middle age at its very center and treated them not as grandmothers to be humored, but as full people, still funny, still furious, still hungry, still interested in sex and ambition and each other. They talked about death at that kitchen table, and menopause, and loneliness, and they did it while making a nation laugh so hard it forgot it was being taught something. A generation of women who had been told their vivid years were behind them looked at that lanai and saw a promise. They are all gone now. Getty left us first, then Arthur, then McClanahan, and finally Betty White, who outlived them all and became, in her 90s, perhaps the most universally adored person in America, a national mascot for the idea that you can be old and delighted and entirely alive. She died on the last day of 2021, 17 days short of 100, and the whole country felt it, because she had come to stand for something we badly wanted to believe, that the last act can be the warmest when 4 women at a table, all of them gone and all of them permanent. Thank you for being a friend indeed. The Huxtables, Felicia Rashad and Malcolm Jamal Warner. For most of the 1980s, the most watched family in America was a warm, funny, affluent black household in a Brooklyn brownstone, and it changed what television and its audience believed a family could look like. We will speak plainly about the shadow, and then set it aside. The show's namesake and patriarch was later revealed, through the courts and the accounts of many women, to be a very different man than the father he played, and that knowledge sits heavily over the reruns now. But the show was never only him. It was an ensemble, and its heart was Felicia Rashad as Claire Huxtable, a lawyer, a mother of 5, elegant and formidable and utterly in command, who became for a generation of viewers the very picture of grace under pressure. Where is she now? Flourishing in a whole second vocation, having served as the dean of a distinguished university's College of Fine Arts, mentoring young artists, and directing acclaimed theater, including a recent production that won the highest honor on Broadway. The woman who played the ideal mother became, in real life, a builder of the next generation. And then there is the son. Malcolm Jamal Warner played Theo, the good-hearted, striving boy of that household, and he grew into a thoughtful, respected adult artist, an actor, and a Grammy-winning spoken-word musician and a director, a genuinely gentle presence in the business. His loss is one of the freshest and most painful in this book. Malcolm Jamal Warner died in the summer of 2025, at only 54, in an accidental drowning while on vacation. He had grown from America's TV son into a soulful, searching man, and the outpouring at his passing made clear how deeply he was loved. We hold him gently here, a different world. The most influential thing that Brownstone family ever did was send one of its daughters off to college, and the show that followed her there quietly reshaped the futures of thousands of real young people. A Different World was set at a fictional, historically black university, and over its run it did something almost no television had done before. It made the life of an HBCU aspirational, vivid, glamorous, and full of possibility, and enrollment at real black colleges is widely credited with rising in its wake. At its center were Jasmine Guy as the pampered, hilarious Southern Belle Whitley, and Kadeem Hardison as the sweet, striving Dwayne, whose slow-burning romance became appointment television. Guy collected a shelf of Image Awards for a performance of pure comic precision. Where are they now? Beautifully, they are going back. Guy and Hardison, along with more of the original cast, are reprising their roles for a new streaming continuation set at the same fictional campus, now following the next generation, including their own character's daughter. A show that once inspired real students to chase real degrees is opening its gates again for a new class. Some stories do not just get remembered, they get to keep teaching. Ed O'Neill. Down the dial from all that warmth sat the least sentimental family in television history, and its exhausted king was a shoe salesman named Al Bundy. Ed O'Neill played Al as a monument to disappointment, a man who had peaked scoring touchdowns in high school and had been sliding gently downhill ever since. And he committed to that misery so fully and so hilariously that Married with Children became the ill-mannered anti-sitcom a whole country secretly needed. It should have typecast him into oblivion. Instead, decades later, O'Neill did the near impossible and landed a second iconic television dad, the gruff patriarch of a sprawling modern family, warm where Al was sour, and won a new generation entirely. Where is he now? About to turn 80, choosing his roles carefully, a real-life martial artist with a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, entirely at peace. What is easy to miss is how different those two dads are, and how much skill it takes to make both fully live. Al Bundy is a monument to defeat, a man who curls into his own misery like it is a warm bath, and the comedy comes from how completely he has given up. The modern family patriarch is the opposite, a gruff exterior wrapped around a soft and loving center, a man who grumbles precisely because he cares too much. Same actor, opposite engines, decades apart, each so definitive that whole generations think of him as one and only one of them. That is not luck. That is an actor who understood, both times, exactly what kind of father he was building. Two of the most famous fathers in sitcom history, played by the same quietly formidable man. Not bad for a guy who started out selling women's shoes and hating every minute of it. Katey Sagal. Beside him, under a tower of teased hair and a leopard print everything, sat a classically trained singer pretending to be the laziest woman in America. As Peggy Bundy, Katey Sagal weaponized indolence, lounging through her marriage in a cloud of bonbons and contempt. And it was such a complete comic creation that few viewers guessed the range underneath. Then she showed them. She reinvented herself as the fierce, Shakespearean matriarch of a motorcycle club on a bloody cable drama, a performance of such gravity that it won her a Golden Globe and erased any doubt about what she could do. Where is she now? Everywhere, quietly. She turned up as a wise, ancient doctor in a splashy fantasy series, and she still lends her voice to a one-eyed spaceship captain in an animated comedy that refuses to die. Peggy Bundy never lifted a finger. The woman who played her has never stopped working and never stopped surprising people. That is the difference between a character and a craftsman. Candice Bergen. She played a woman so sharp and so unbowed that a sitting vice president of the United States picked a fight with her and lost. As Murphy Brown, Candice Bergen created one of the most formidable characters in television history, a hard-charging, recovering, take-no-prisoners news anchor who did not soften herself for anyone. When the show had Murphy become a single mother by choice, it detonated a genuine national argument about family and values, with the country's second highest official scolding a fictional character by name, and the show firing right back. 5 Emmys came of it, and a permanent place in the story of how television grew up. She was so good, in fact, that she eventually stopped submitting herself for the award to give someone else a chance. Where is she now? Alive, wry, and entirely undimmed, turning up for a revival of the old show and dropping in on late-night sketch stages to remind everyone that the timing is still lethal. She has aged into exactly the kind of woman Murphy Brown would have become, unimpressed by nonsense, funny about her own vanity, and utterly unwilling to pretend to be smaller than she is. Some characters teach the actor how to be brave. In her case, you get the sense the bravery was always hers, and Murphy just borrowed it. Harry Anderson and Markie Post. Night court was in session, and the bench belonged to a man who did card tricks between cases. Harry Anderson played Judge Harry Stone as a whimsical soul in a grim building, a magician and con man at heart who happened to dispense justice. And the reason it worked is that Anderson was, in real life, exactly that, a genuine sleight-of-hand artist who would later run a magic shop in New Orleans, a man who found the whole world a little bit enchanted. Across the courtroom, Markie Post played the earnest public defender Christine Sullivan, all bright idealism and comic exasperation, the beating heart of the ensemble. Both are gone now. Harry Anderson died in the spring of 2018 at 65 of a stroke. Markie Post died in the summer of 2021 at 70 after a long and private fight with cancer. They presided together over one of the friendliest rooms television ever built, a night shift full of oddballs who plainly adored one another. When a revival of the show arrived years later, it did the only decent thing and honored the judge who started it all. Court is adjourned, gently, for them both. Bronson Pinchot. He arrived as a shepherd from an imaginary country, mangling English into music, and he became a catchphrase machine. And then he did the most interesting thing anyone in this book has done with fame. He disappeared into a better use of it. As bulky on Perfect Strangers, Pinchot was pure delight, an innocent abroad whose baffled joy and rubber-faced glee could carry a whole scene. That kind of role can be a life sentence. Pinchot served his time and then quietly built a second career so unexpected that most of his old fans have no idea it exists. He became one of the most sought-after and prolific audiobook narrators alive, the voice inside hundreds of novels, a craftsman of accents and characters working in the dark where nobody sees your face. On the side, he restores crumbling historic houses, saving the past one plank at a time. Think about what that pivot actually required of him. To have been that face, that specific rubber-limbed catchphrase-launching face, so completely famous that people shouted his lines at him on the street, and then to choose deliberately a craft where nobody would ever see your face at all, where your entire instrument is your voice, alone in a padded booth, conjuring a dozen distinct human beings out of thin air, page after page, hundreds of times over. It is the least glamorous work imaginable, and it demands more pure skill than most of what passes for stardom. He did not fall into it because his career collapsed. He walked into it because he loved the work, and he became quietly, genuinely great at it, while the world was not looking. Where is he now? Delightfully active, popping up in a splashy, streaming mystery, reprising an old film role for a sequel, reuniting with his sitcom partner to the joy of the internet. He took a silly, beloved character and used the fame it bought him to become an artist in a form almost no one watches. There is something quietly perfect about that. The man of 1,000 voices found the one job where the voice is everything, and the face does not matter at all. Kirk Cameron. He was the poster on 10 million bedroom walls, and then, at the height of it, he walked away from the thing that put him there. As Mike Seaver on Growing Pains, Kirk Cameron was a bona fide teen idol. The mischievous grin the magazines could not get enough of. And in the middle of that adoration, he became a devout, born-again Christian, and it reorganized his entire life. He gradually left mainstream Hollywood behind and poured himself into faith-based films and open-air evangelism, a pivot so complete that it puzzled and, for some, provoked the industry that had made him a star. Where is he now? Exactly where he chose to be, making Christian movies, touring the country with faith-centered events, unmistakably committed to a road most of his former peers would never take. You do not have to share his convictions to recognize the rarity of what he did. At the precise moment fame was his for the taking, he decided it was not the thing he wanted, and he reached for something else entirely. In a book full of people who fought to keep the spotlight, here is one who simply turned and walked out of it, on purpose, toward what he believed. That is its own kind of story. The Girls of Eastland. At a boarding school that existed only on a soundstage, 4 very different girls grew up in front of us, presided over by a house mother with a heart the size of the dormitory. The facts of life took its time and let its young cast age into real characters. And where are they all now? Charlotte Ray, the beloved Mrs. Garrett, who anchored the whole enterprise, died in the summer of 2018 at 92, after a long life on stage and screen. Her students, though, are still very much with us. Lisa Welchel turned the Prissy Blair into a life as a Christian author and reality competition contender and cheerful television host. Kim Fields, forever young Tootie, on her roller skates, became a working actress and director, currently part of a hit streaming comedy. Nancy McKeon, the tough tomboy Joe, chose privacy, living quietly on a Texas ranch away from the noise. And Mindy Cohn, the warm and funny Natalie, spent years as the voice of a certain cartoon detective and has lately turned up in a glossy period comedy. 4 girls at a fictional school, scattered now across 4 completely different lives, which is exactly how it is supposed to go. You take the ones who came up together, and you point them at the world, and you see where they land. They landed fine. Bob Newhart. He built one of the great comic careers in American history, almost entirely out of pauses, and out of a stammer he refused to fix. Bob Newhart was the calmest man in any room, a soft-spoken everyman who stood at the still center, while lunacy swirled around him, and he made stillness funnier than almost anyone has ever made motion. He anchored 2 beloved sitcoms across 2 decades, first as a mild psychologist besieged by eccentric patients, then as a Vermont innkeeper surrounded by oddballs, and he ended that second show with what is widely called the single greatest final scene in sitcom history. A joke so perfect, it retroactively rewrote everything that came before it. He collected a Grammy, an Emmy, the Mark Twain Prize, and the helpless devotion of every comedian who understood how hard it is to do so little so well. And late in his life, a whole new generation discovered him when he turned up as a beloved retired scientist on one of the biggest comedies of its era, and finally, in his 80s, won the Primetime Emmy that had somehow escaped him for 50 years. Bob Newhart died in the summer of 2024 at 94. He had spent a lifetime proving that you do not need to be the loudest person in the room to own it, that a raised eyebrow and a long, patient silence can level a house. The silence is a little longer now. We are grateful he filled it for as long as he did, the crowded couches of the must-see 1990s. By the 90s, the sitcom was no longer just comfort food. It was an event. A single night of television could hold the whole country, and the apartments got smaller, the friends got closer, and the coffee shops and the bars and the Seattle high-rises became the places we most wanted to be. This was the boom, and the people at the center of it are living some of the most surprising second acts in this whole book. Jason Alexander. He built the most gloriously terrible man on television out of spare parts, and one of those parts was the show's own creator. As George Costanza, Jason Alexander turned petty grievance into high art, a squat, balding bundle of lies and schemes and spectacular self-sabotage. It was one of the great comic performances of the era, and it came with the curse attached to every member of that famous cast. The sense that nothing after could ever be that big. Alexander made peace with the curse by simply refusing to sit inside it. He is a theater animal at heart, a Broadway song and dance man, and he poured himself into stages and voice booths and directing chairs, working with a steadiness that has nothing to prove. Where is he now? Busy and content, still turning up in prestige comedies and gathering with his old creative family for reunions that light up the internet. He never topped George, and he stopped needing to. He found the healthier trick to be grateful for the immortal role and then go do 100 other things you love. Not a bad way to beat a curse. Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
They said there was a curse on that show, that its stars were doomed to fade. She heard the theory, and then she spent 30 years detonating it.
As Elaine, Julia Louis-Dreyfus was the only woman in that quartet of monsters, and more than held her own, all sharp elbows and exasperated shoves. And then she went out and built the single most decorated career of anyone who ever appeared on the show, a beloved second sitcom, then a political satire that won her a mountain of Emmys so tall it rewrote the record books. Then, in a twist, nobody scripted, a leap into the biggest movie franchise on earth as a scheming power broker. And here is the part that ought to be studied in every school that teaches this craft. She was the only woman in a cast of famous men, handed a role that could easily have been the girlfriend, the foil, the one whose job was to react. She turned Elaine into a full monster, as selfish and petty and gloriously flawed as any of the men, and in doing so, she quietly claimed equal ownership of the whole enterprise. Then, freed at last from that apartment, she did not soften into likable middle-aged roles. She went harder. She played a vice president so ruthless and so profane that the performance became a kind of national landmark, and she collected trophies for it in numbers that had never been done before. Where is she now? At the very top, and still climbing, headlining superhero blockbusters in her 60s. The Seinfeld curse was real for some. For her, it was a starting gun. She took the least heralded seat at that famous table and turned it into the most acclaimed career of them all, which is its own kind of poetic justice. Get out, indeed. Michael Richards. He fell through doorways and skidded across rooms and turned pure physical chaos into one of the most beloved comic characters of the century. And then, in a single terrible night, he lost nearly all of it. As Cosmo Kramer, Michael Richards was a marvel of the body, a human pinball who could make an audience roar just by bursting through an apartment door. The role won him Emmys and a permanent place in the comedy canon. And then, years after the show ended, in a moment on a comedy club stage in 2006, he lost control and said something ugly and racist that traveled around the world within hours, and it effectively ended his public career. He stepped away almost entirely for close to 2 decades. We are not going to replay that night here. What matters for a book about where these people are now is what he did with the long silence that followed. By his own account, he spent those years in genuine reckoning, trying to understand the anger that had erupted out of him, doing the slow, private work of a man trying to become someone he could live with. In 2024, he broke the quiet with a candid memoir, expressing regret and looking honestly at the whole arc of his life. And he began, tentatively, to appear in public again. Where is he now? Older, humbled, and cautiously stepping back toward the light, carrying a mistake he has not tried to erase. His is the most cautionary story in this book, a reminder that the thing you build over a lifetime can be undone in a minute, and that the only road back, if there is one, runs through the hard country of actually facing what you did. Kelsey Grammer. Some actors chase a great role for a season. Kelsey Grammer chased one for 40 years and caught it, again and again and again. He first appeared as the pompous psychiatrist Fraser Crane as a supporting player in that famous Boston bar, and the character was so rich that they gave him his own show, and that show became one of the most awarded comedies ever made. Grammer played the same fussy, wounded, endlessly self-regarding man across 3 different series and 4 decades, a feat of sustained character work, almost without parallel in television. Where is he now? Still chasing him. A recent revival of the psychiatrist's story was launched and then cancelled, and Grammer, undeterred, has been trying to find it a new home, unwilling to let the character rest. He's also stepping into the superhero universe as a blue-furred genius. He's a complicated, sometimes polarizing figure off screen, But on the question of craft, there is no argument. He loved one character more faithfully than most people love anything, and he served him for a lifetime.
David Hyde Pierce.
Beside that pompous radio psychiatrist stood his even more fastidious younger brother, and the two of them together performed one of the great comic double acts in television history, a pair of brilliant, insufferable snobs who were somehow impossible not to love. As Niles Crane, David Hyde Pierce turned refinement into slapstick, a man so precise and so tightly wound that a single raised eyebrow could carry an entire scene, and he won 4 Emmys for the sustained miracle of it. And then when the show ended, he did something quietly telling. He mostly left television behind and went home to the theater, where he won a Tony and built a second life on the stage, on his own terms, out of the glare. Where is he now? Exactly where he wants to be, starring in Broadway revivals and concert productions, choosing stage over screen, and lending his voice to Alzheimer's awareness after watching the disease take his own father. When they revived the old show, he politely declined to return, saying he did not think there was much left for Niles to do. A wonderfully in-character reason. He is not chasing the spotlight, and he never was. He is one of the rare performers who reached the very top of television and decided, with total serenity, that it was not the summit he actually wanted. The stage was. He climbed down from one mountain to go climb the right one, Bob Saget. The whole country knew 2 men with the same face, and only one of them was real. To a generation of kids, Bob Saget was the sweetest, squarest dad on television, the widowed father dispensing gentle life lessons in a full house, and the wholesome host of a clip show built on falling grandpas. To anyone who ventured into a comedy club, he was something else entirely. One of the filthiest, most gleefully profane stand-ups alive. The gap between the two was the joke of his whole career, and he adored it. Bob Saget died in January of 2022 at 65, alone in a hotel room, from a head injury he apparently never realized was serious. The outpouring was enormous, and it came heaviest from other comedians, because the secret about Saget was that beneath both masks, the wholesome one and the filthy one, he was, by universal testimony, one of the kindest and most generous men the business had. 2 faces, and behind them, a genuinely good one. That is the one his friends will not stop talking about. Dave Coulier. In that same full house lived the goofy best friend with the rubber face and the cartoon voices, and his real story turned out to be the bravest one on the block. Dave Coulier played Joey, the man-child uncle, whose whole job was to be silly, and he was very good at silly. But the where are they now here is not about comedy. In late 2024, Coulier revealed he was fighting an aggressive lymphoma. Then, while the world was still holding its breath over that, he faced a second, separate cancer. He went through all of it in public, with a candor meant to help other people facing the same fear. And here is where we land, because it matters. As of early 2026, Dave Coulier has announced that he is in remission from both. We will not dwell on the hard machinery of treatment. We will just say that the goofy uncle turned out to have a spine of steel, that he used his fame to make other frightened people feel less alone, and that the news right now is good. Keep him in your thoughts and be glad. This one lands soft. Roseanne Barr. She built one of the most important sitcoms in the history of the form, and then, in a single reckless moment, she brought the whole house down on her own head. It is impossible to overstate what Roseanne Barr made. Her show put a working-class family on television that actually looked and sounded like working-class families, funny and struggling and real, and it spoke for millions of people the medium usually ignored. That legacy is permanent, and it belongs to her. So does the ending, and honesty requires that we name it. Years after the show first ended, a hugely successful revival was launched, and then Barr posted something so racist and ugly that she was fired within hours, and the series was rebuilt without her. Where is she now? In her 70s, living in Texas, a divisive figure who surfaces mainly in the culture wars. We are not here to litigate any of it. We are here to hold two true things at once: that she created something that mattered enormously, and that she threw a great deal of it away in an afternoon. Both are part of the record. That is the cautionary weight of her story, and there is no telling it without the whole of it.
John Goodman.
Beside her for all those years stood the man who would, in the end, have to carry the house without her. John Goodman played Dan Connor, the beloved bear-like dad of that same landmark show. And even at the time, everyone could see that Goodman was operating on a different level. A stage-trained heavyweight who could turn on a dime from belly laugh to breaking your heart. Away from the sitcom, he built one of the most respected film careers of his generation, a favorite of the finest directors working. Where is he now? Still here, still magnificent, and notably still standing. When the show was rebuilt without its namesake, it was Goodman's Dan who anchored it, and he carried that continuation all the way to its series finale, giving the fictional family the dignified send-off its creator's conduct had nearly denied it. He has said he simply hasn't spoken to Barr in years. He is the pro who kept the ship afloat when the captain went overboard, and he did it without ever making it about himself. That is what class looks like.
Tim Allen.
He grunted his way to the top of the ratings, and then he never once let go of the sitcom saddle. Tim Allen arrived as Tim the Toolman Taylor, a bumbling macho host of a home improvement show within the show, and his cheerful caveman energy carried one of the biggest comedies of the decade. At the very same time, he was leading a holiday film franchise and voicing a certain spaceman toy who taught a generation about infinity and beyond. Where is he now? Exactly where he has always been, at the head of a network sitcom, because unlike almost everyone else in this book, Allen never really left the form that made him. After years leading one long-running comedy, he is now several seasons into another, one that reunited him with the sons from his old tool belt days. There is something almost defiant about it. The industry keeps announcing that the multi-camera, laugh-track, all-American network sitcom is dead, a relic of a vanished century, and Tim Allen keeps quietly leading another one and another, drawing an audience that the tastemakers swear no longer exists. He is not chasing prestige or reinvention or the approval of critics. He found the specific thing he does well, the everyman dad grumbling through a family that loves him, and he has simply refused every invitation to be embarrassed by it. In a business obsessed with the next new thing, there is a strange integrity in being reliably unfashionably yourself for 40 years. He is a throwback, a working sitcom lead in an age that keeps declaring the sitcom lead extinct, and he just keeps clocking in. Some people find the thing they are good at and simply refuse to stop doing it. Grunt included. James Avery. Every great sitcom needs a foundation, and one of the greatest was a tall man in a Bel Air mansion who taught a wisecracking kid how to become a man. James Avery played Uncle Phil on the show that made Will Smith a star, and though the series was a comedy, Avery gave it its gravity. In its most famous scene, a moment of raw fatherly grief that still circulates decades later. It was Avery's steadiness that let his young co-star break open completely. He was the anchor. He was the dad the whole audience wished they had. James Avery died on the last day of 2013 at 68 from complications after heart surgery. Will Smith has said, simply, that every young man needs an Uncle Phil, and a generation that grew up in that fictional mansion knows exactly what he means. Avery played a father so convincingly that millions of people mourned him like their own. There is no higher compliment for the work he did. Reginald VelJohnson. He is, by a wide margin, the most reassuring man in America, and he has quietly built an entire career out of it. Reginald VelJohnson played Carl Winslow, the patient, put upon police officer father forever exasperated by the nerd next door. And before that, he was the cop on the phone who talked a barefoot hero through a very bad Christmas in a certain action classic. Warm authority is his whole instrument, and he plays it beautifully. Where is he now? Cheerfully cashing in on exactly that persona, appearing for years as the winking embodiment of the generic television dad in a popular run of insurance commercials, and even strapping on the sequins for a season of celebrity ballroom dancing. He is a working actor of the best kind, comfortable in his own affable skin, happy to let the world keep casting him as everyone's favorite dad. When a face is that trustworthy, you lean into it. He has, all the way to the bank, and he seems to be having a wonderful time. Queen Latifah. Before a certain famous foursome of friends drank coffee on a couch, there was another group of young professionals in a New York apartment, and the woman at its center was already becoming unstoppable. Queen Latifah led the show as a magazine founder, and even then it was clear the sitcom was too small to hold her. She was already a groundbreaking rapper. She would become an Oscar-nominated movie star, a producer, a talk show host, a one-woman entertainment industry. There is almost no lane she has not entered and dominated. Where is she now? Operating at full power. She spent recent years leading a hit action drama. She was inducted into one of music's highest halls of fame, and she is stepping in as a coach on one of the biggest singing competitions on television. The sitcom was a launch pad, and she used every ounce of its thrust. She is one of the very few people in this entire book for whom Where Are They Now has a one-word answer: everywhere. Martin Lawrence. His energy was a force of nature, so much so that when the rumors started, the whole culture worried at once. Martin Lawrence played the loud, lovable Detroit radio host on his own self-titled show, a comic tornado who could play half a dozen characters in a single episode. That intensity was legendary, and over the years it fed a persistent, anxious rumor mill about his health, flaring up again when a video circulated that alarmed his fans. So let's state the where are they now plainly, because reassurance is the whole point here. He is fine. Lawrence himself addressed the worry directly, telling everyone he was healthy and in good spirits, and he backed it up, appearing noticeably trimmer and lending his voice and presence to new projects, with more on the way. The rumors ran ahead of the truth, as rumors do. The truth is that one of the most explosively funny performers of his generation is doing well. Sometimes the kindest thing a story like this can do is simply say so clearly. He's okay.
Tichina Arnold.
Standing toe-to-toe with that Detroit tornado, giving back everything he dished out and then some, was one of the most reliably funny women in television, and she has quietly never stopped working since. As Pam on that same raucous 1990s comedy, Tichina Arnold was the friend who would not be intimidated, trading rapid-fire insults with the star in some of the show's most electric scenes. A performer with impeccable timing and zero fear. What is remarkable is how seamlessly she carried that gift across the decades that followed. Where is she now? At the very center of the medium, having spent years anchoring a hit network comedy about neighbors learning to understand each other, a show that ran for the better part of a decade. She recently celebrated 20 years with her studio by signing a deal to develop her own projects, stepping fully into the role of producer and creator. She is a model of the working actor's long game, the performer who never had the single explosive tabloid arc, just a steady, decades-long climb built on being genuinely, dependably excellent. The loud friend from the old apartment became a quiet power in the industry. That is a "where are they now" with no drama in it at all, and there is something deeply satisfying about that. Alfonso Ribeiro. He did a stiff, flailing, joyful little dance to an old crooner's tune, and it became so beloved that it has outlived the show, the decade, and very nearly the language itself. As Carlton on the Bel Air comedy that minted a superstar, Alfonso Ribeiro played the preppy, sheltered, deeply earnest cousin, and his signature dance became one of the most enduring pieces of physical comedy in television history, resurfacing for entirely new generations who have no idea where it came from. That kind of iconic bit can flatten a career. Ribeiro turned it into a launchpad for a whole second profession. Where is he now? One of the most familiar hosts on American television, presiding for years over a long-running home video clip show and co-hosting the biggest celebrity ballroom competition on the air. He made the leap that so few actors manage, from beloved sitcom character to trusted, durable host, the friendly face who walks into your living room every week on his own terms. Carlton was the punchline. Alfonso Ribeiro turned himself into the host of the party. Helen Hunt and Paul Reiser. They were, for the length of the decade, television's most believable married couple, and then they both walked off into completely different and completely happy lives. On their show about a newlywed New York pair, Helen Hunt and Paul Reiser made the small friction of a good marriage into comedy gold. What is remarkable is what each did next. Hunt won an Academy Award right in the middle of the sitcom's run and moved fluidly into directing and prestige drama. Reiser, meanwhile, and into a whole second career as a beloved character actor, turning up as a slippery bureaucrat in a nostalgic monster hit and a wry presence across a range of acclaimed shows. Where are they now? Both working, both respected, both comfortable, and, to the delight of fans, reunited on a convention stage not long ago to reminisce. They played a couple learning that the everyday stuff is the whole marriage. Then they went out and built two full, separate, thriving careers, proof that you can share one of television's great partnerships and still each become entirely your own person. Fran Drescher. You heard her before you saw her. That laugh, that honk, that gloriously unapologetic queen's voice, cutting across the airwaves like a car alarm made of pure charm. As the title character on her own hit comedy, Fran Drescher played a fashion-forward nanny who talked her way into a rich family's household and hearts. And the remarkable thing, the thing most viewers never clocked, is that she was not just the star. She co-created the show, she produced it, she built the whole vehicle and then drove it for 6 seasons. Behind the flashy outfits and the nasal punchlines was a shrewd businesswoman running her own operation, which is a rarer thing for a woman in that era than the show ever let on. Then her life turned hard. A cancer scare that doctors missed for 2 years became a cause. She survived it, wrote about it, and turned herself into a health advocate determined that no one else get misdiagnosed the way she was. And then came the twist that not even her own writers would have pitched. This woman, this sitcom nanny, got herself elected president of one of Hollywood's most powerful unions. And when the industry ground to a halt in a historic labor fight, it was Fran Drescher standing at the microphone, fierce and sequined and absolutely unyielding, speaking for 160,000 performers. Where is she now? Having led that union through its biggest battle in decades, she stepped aside in 2025, handing off the gavel. The nanny became a labor leader. Nobody saw it coming, least of all the people who only ever heard the laugh. John Lithgow. He played an alien commander disguised as a college professor, trying and hilariously failing to understand life on Earth. And it turned out to be one of the greatest actors of his generation, just having a little fun. On his high-concept comedy about extraterrestrials posing as a human family, John Lithgow was gloriously, operatically silly, a giant ham, given full permission to explode, and he won Emmys for the sheer joyful excess of it. But comedy was only ever one room in a very large house. Before it and after it, Lithgow built one of the most distinguished acting careers alive, moving between chilling screen villains and towering stage roles, with an ease that made none of it look difficult. Where is he now? At 80, working harder and better than almost anyone. He earned wide acclaim in a somber film about the choosing of a pope. He won a Tony for playing a literary giant on Broadway, and he has now pulled on the robes and long beard of the most famous wizard in fiction for a lavish new adaptation, introducing himself to yet another generation. He is proof of a quietly radical idea about the sitcom, that it need not be a ceiling or a cage, that a great actor can romp through a broad network comedy and lose not 1 ounce of his gravity, and can still, decades later, be one of the most sought-after artists in the English-speaking world. He never chose between silly and serious. He simply refused the choice and kept everything. An interlude. Not every story lands soft. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. You have noticed by now that this book keeps landing on grace. The reinventions, the remissions, the elder statesman still working at 90. And a great many of these stories genuinely do end in the light, because talent and luck and love are real, and because the people who make it into our living rooms tend to be survivors. But not all of it lands soft, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. Some of the people we adored made choices that cost them everything they built. Some were taken far too young, mid-sentence, with the best chapters still unwritten. Some spent decades wrestling something the audience never saw. The frozen smile on the screen was never the whole person, and the whole person, like all of us, had weather. The reason we tell the hard parts anyway, gently, without gawking, is that the alternative is a lie, and a lie is no way to say thank you. These were real lives. Real lives have real endings, and some of those endings are hard. To honor someone is to see all of them, the triumph and the fall, the laughter and the loss, and to hold it with the tenderness you would want held for yourself. So as we walk into our final stretch, toward the turn of the century and toward the ones we have lost, keep both things in your hands at once. Gratitude and grief. That is the honest shape of a life. It is the honest shape of this book. The turn of the century, and the last of the big broadcast comedies. By the 2000s, the ground was shifting under the whole medium. Cable was rising, the internet was coming, and the giant shared audience that made a sitcom a national event was beginning to splinter. But before it did, one more wave of comedies planted itself in the culture, and the people who led them are, for the most part, still very much in motion. Ray Romano.
He walked into the business as a stand-up who told jokes about his own family, and then he built a show out of them so accurate that it made half of America wince in recognition. As Ray Barron, the sports writer, besieged by his meddling parents across the street, Romano anchored a comedy about the specific warfare of family with a hangdog everyman decency. What is interesting is what he did once the laughter stopped. He did not chase another sitcom. He deepened. He turned in aching, dramatic work, and then he stepped behind the camera to write and direct a tender film about his old neighborhood, revealing a filmmaker hiding inside the comic all along. Where is he now? A respected multi-hyphenate, taking on new projects and hosting the reunions that keep his old television family close. And that family gathered recently to remember the two who anchored it and are now gone. Peter Boyle, the glowering father, who left us back in 2006, and Doris Roberts, the gloriously overbearing mother, who passed in 2016. The show was about how family drives you crazy and how you would be lost without them. Time has made that truer than the writers could have known. Kevin James. He was the big man who could move, a physical comedian in the body of a Queens delivery driver, and he made it look like the easiest thing in the world. As Doug Heffernan, Kevin James spent 9 seasons in a working-class marriage that felt lived in and real, trading barbs with a sharp wife and a cranky father-in-law in the basement. He never reinvented himself into something unrecognizable, and he never needed to. He simply kept being the affable, quick-footed everyman audiences liked. Where is he now? Right in the thick of it, releasing stand-up specials, headlining new films, and enjoying a strange and delightful second life as an internet meme. His shrugging image passed around by millions who may not even know the show it came from. He is proof that likability is its own durable career. People just enjoy his company, on screen and off, and that has never gone out of style. Jerry Stiller, down in that same Queens basement screaming about nothing at the top of his lungs, was a man in his 70s having the greatest late career resurrection in comedy history. By the time most people met Jerry Stiller as the volcanic Arthur Spooner, they had already met him as the equally volcanic Frank Costanza, the father who's invented holiday and whose bellowed demand for serenity had made him a scene-stealing legend on one of the biggest shows ever made. What most did not know is that Stiller had already had a whole career before that, decades of it, half of a beloved comedy duo with his wife, a partnership on stage, and in a marriage that lasted more than 60 years. The explosions were an act. The man behind them was, by every account, gentle and devoted. Jerry Stiller died in the spring of 2020 at 92 of natural causes, 5 years after losing the wife he had adored for a lifetime. He had raised a son who became a movie star, and he had shown every late bloomer in the business that the best role of your life might still be waiting for you at 70. He spent his final famous years pretending to be furious and left behind a family and a profession that could not have loved him more. Serenity at last, for a man who made a fortune shouting for it. Leah Remini. She played the sharp-tongued wife for 9 seasons, and then she became famous all over again for the sharpest thing she ever did, which had nothing to do with comedy. As Carrie Heffernan, Remini was the quick, no-nonsense counterweight to her husband's goofiness, a genuinely funny performer with impeccable timing. But her Where Are They Now took a turn almost no one saw coming. After leaving the Church of Scientology, she went public in a way few ever have,
producing an award-winning documentary series that gave a platform to others and turned her into one of the most prominent voices on the subject in the country. Where is she now? Still outspoken, still working, and navigating her own life on her own terms, having recently closed one personal chapter and opened another. She took the visibility a sitcom gave her and spent it on something she believed mattered at real personal cost. Whatever you make of the fight she chose, the courage of choosing it is not in question. Charlie Sheen. For a while, he was the highest-paid actor on television, and then he became the most public cautionary tale in the business, his unraveling broadcast in real time to a watching, wincing world. As Charlie Harper, Sheen played a hard-drinking, womanizing bachelor, a role that ran uncomfortably close to a life that was coming apart. And in 2011, it all detonated, spectacularly and painfully, ending with his exit from the show. It looked, for a long time, like the end of the story. It was not. It is worth pausing on how strange and public that fall was, because there had never been anything quite like it. This was not a story that leaked out slowly. It was a man narrating his own combustion into every available camera, in real time, a phrase-generating machine of grandiosity that the whole internet turned into a carnival. For a few weeks, the country treated it as entertainment, and then, as the laughter curdled into something closer to alarm, most people looked away, assuming they knew how it would end. Stories like that usually end one way. His did not. The recovery, when it came, arrived without a single camera present, in the unbroadcastable daily grind of simply not picking up the thing that was killing him, one unremarkable morning after another, for years. Where is he now? Sober by his own account since December of 2017, which is the number that matters most in his whole biography. He has faced the wreckage in a documentary and in a candid best-selling memoir, and he speaks now with the plainness of a man who has stopped performing his own life. We will not linger over the worst of it, because he has lived it and told it himself. We will simply note the thing worth noting. He hit the bottom in the loudest possible way, and then quietly, over years, he climbed back up. That climb is the most impressive role he ever took. Bernie Mac. He walked onto a stage, fixed the audience with a withering stare, called them by a name that was equal parts insult and endearment, and owned every soul in the room before he finished his first sentence. Bernie Mac was already a titan of stand-up, one of the legendary kings of comedy, when he brought his fearless, big-hearted, blunt persona to his own sitcom, playing a version of himself, suddenly raising his sister's 3 children. It was a fresh and honest show about a man who loved kids and had absolutely no patience for their nonsense, and it earned him Emmy nominations and a whole new mainstream audience who fell for the tenderness hiding under the growl. Bernie Mac died in the summer of 2008, at only 50, of complications from pneumonia, having lived for years with a quiet, serious illness he rarely let slow him down. He was just breaking through as a movie star, with the best years seemingly ahead of him, which makes the loss ache all the more. He built an entire comedy out of pretending to be a hard man, and everyone who knew him understood it was an act, that the gruffness was the wrapping and the love was the gift. He was taken far too early. The room he commanded so completely has never quite been filled again. The Malcolm family, and the most surprising rise of all, they were the loudest, most chaotic household on television, and the man playing the frazzled dad was about to become one of the greatest dramatic actors of his generation. The show followed a boy genius drowning in a family of brothers, but its adult anchors were the parents. Jane Kaczmarek's ferociously funny, terrifying Lois, and Bryan Cranston's Hall, a goofy, spineless, lovable father. Watch that performance now, and it is almost impossible to reconcile with what came next, because Cranston walked off that manic sitcom set and into the role of a lifetime, transforming himself into television's most chilling anti-hero and winning a shelf of Emmys for it. It remains one of the most stunning genre leaps in the medium's history, from cartoonish sitcom dad to the darkest man on prestige television. Sit with that transformation for a second, because it is one of the strangest facts in the history of the medium. The same face, the same voice, the same man. In 1 decade, he is pratfalling around a suburban kitchen in his underwear, a father so hapless his own children barely respect him. Pure, elastic goofiness. In the next, he is standing in a desert in a pork pie hat, utterly still, having become the thing everyone should have been afraid of. No transition, no slow build of prestige roles to prepare us. He simply walked from one to the other and dared us to believe both. That he pulled it off is the best argument ever made that the sitcom dad and the dramatic titan are the same muscle, worked in different directions. Where are they now? Happily reunited. The whole family came back together for a revival that picked the chaos right back up, decades later, with the kids grown and the parents older, but no less unhinged. It is a joyful thing to see, and at the center of it stands Cranston, living proof that a sitcom can be a launchpad to absolutely anywhere, even the shadows. Zach Braff. He daydreamed his way through a hospital as a young doctor, and in the spaces between the jokes, he was quietly becoming a filmmaker. As J.D. on the medical comedy that blended slapstick with genuine heartbreak, Zach Braff played a wide-eyed innocent whose imagination kept spilling into the frame. Even during the show's run, he stepped behind the camera and made an indie film that became a touchstone for a whole generation of young adults, announcing that there was a real artistic sensibility behind the goofy grin. Where is he now? Back where he started, and loving it. He is leading a revival of the very show that made him, directing and producing it, reunited with the on-screen best friend whose real-life friendship has become the stuff of legend. Some people spend their whole lives running from the thing that made them famous. Braff turned around, walked back into the hospital, and picked the story back up, older and wiser, and plainly grateful. Not every homecoming is a retreat. Sometimes it is just love, an interlude, a different kind of famous. We are near the end now, and it is worth naming something that has been quietly true this whole time. The people in this book are famous in a way that barely exists anymore. They became household names in an era when a household actually gathered together in one room, around one screen, choosing from a small handful of channels. That kind of fame is enormous and strange. It means a stranger in an airport feels like your cousin. It means millions of people you will never meet mourn you like a friend. It means one character, one apartment, one catchphrase can outrun everything else you ever do. That world is gone, or nearly so. The audience has scattered into 1,000 streams. It is very hard now to be famous the way Norm on his bar stool was famous, or the way the girls on that Miami lanai were famous, which means these people are not just performers. They are the last representatives of a vanished kind of togetherness, the final generation of strangers a whole country agreed to love at the same time. So when we ask where they are now, we are also, quietly, saying goodbye to that, to the shared living room, to the appointment we all kept together on a Thursday night, hold on to that tenderness. We have one last thing to do. We have to remember the ones who are gone,
The ones we lost.
Every long walk back through the years arrives eventually at the names we can only say gently now. They came into our homes and made us laugh, and we owe them the small dignity of being remembered together in the warmth they gave us. Some left us long ago, and their absence has become part of the furniture of our grief. John Ritter, falling silent far too young. James Avery, the towering father. Jean Stapleton, who set her famous role down and lived on gloriously before she went. Peter Boyle and Doris Roberts, the parents across the street. Harry Anderson and Markie Post, holding their friendly night court. Charlotte Ray, the house mother. Howard Hesseman, the counterculture DJ Estelle Getty. B. Arthur, and Rue McClanahan, 3 of the 4 women at the table, who slipped away one after another until only Betty White remained. And then, at the very end of a year, she was gone too. 17 short days from 100, and it felt like the closing of an era. And we hold, with special care, the pioneers and the trailblazers, the ones who opened doors that stayed open. Diahann Carroll, who walked through first. Carol O'Connor, who sat in the chair that changed everything. Red Fox and Isabel Sanford, and Sherman Hemsley, who brought black life and black wealth and black wit into every living room in America. Bernie Mac, taken at 50 with the best still ahead of him. Jerry Stiller, roaring with love to the very end. Bob Newhart, the quiet master of the perfect pause. Florence Henderson and David Cassidy, the sunny faces of a gentler decade. Each of them moved the whole medium a little further along, and each of them is owed a debt that reruns can never repay. And some we lost so recently that the ache is still fresh. Bob Saget and Kirstie Alley, Suzanne Summers and John Amos, Malcolm Jamal Warner, the searching, soulful man who had once been America's TV son, taken by the sea at only 54. Demond Wilson, who left the junkyard to save souls, and Loretta Swit and her hard-won dignity. George Wendt, and the bar stool that will never feel the same. Lonnie Anderson, gone just shy of 80. And Rob Reiner, the young man from the loud Queen's living room who grew into one of the finest storytellers his art ever produced, taken from us far too soon, honored by a standing room of the people whose lives he had touched. We will not dwell on how any of them left. We will hold instead the gift each of them handed us, an evening made lighter, a laugh in a hard week, a face that felt like family. Thank you, every one of you. The room is quieter without you, and warmer for having had you in it. A word for the listener. So, there you have it. The doors we knocked on, the lives we followed, the answer to the question that started us walking. Here is what all of it comes down to, if it comes down to anything. The people we watched were never really the characters we loved. They were artists, doing a job, and then they were human beings living the rest of their lives, and those lives contained everything ours do. Triumph and failure, illness and recovery, reinvention and loss, and underneath it all, the plain, unglamorous work of getting up the next morning and continuing. We froze them at their brightest. They kept going anyway, into chapters we mostly never saw. Maybe that is the quiet lesson tucked inside all this nostalgia, that there is a second act, and a third, and a fourth. That the role that defines you at 25 need not imprison you at 70. that you can be knocked all the way down, the way some of these people were, and still find your feet again, and that the kindest thing we can do for the strangers who once made us laugh is to grant them the same grace we would want for ourselves, to be seen as a whole life and not just a frozen frame. So the next time an old episode flickers past and a familiar face makes you smile, take a second, wonder what became of them, and then, if you can, be a little gentler with them and with everyone who was ever loved for one bright moment and then had to go on living. They gave us so much. The least we can give back is our tenderness. Thank you for taking this walk back with us. Be kind to the people you grew up watching, and to the people you grew up with, and to yourself. We will see you on the next one. Books by Barron. Where Are They Now? A note on respect in language. This program is a work of affectionate biography and commentary. Where the record is painful, we have chosen restraint over detail, description over intrusion. We have named hardship where it is part of the story, and left the private machinery of it alone. We do not repeat tabloid cruelty. We do not speculate where the facts run out, and we do not sit in judgment of lives far more complicated than any half-hour summary can hold. Contested matters are named as contested. Where someone has told their own story, we have deferred to the way they chose to tell it. A note on sources. Everything in this book is drawn from publicly available information. Interviews, obituaries, reputable reporting, public records, and the subject's own published words. Present-day details were verified against current reporting as of the time of writing. Where accounts differ, we have favored the most credible and the most recent. Memory is imperfect, and the record keeps moving. Corrections offered in good faith are always welcome. About the Where Are They Now series. Where Are They Now is an ongoing series from books by Barron that follows the people who once lived on our screens and asks the question time always leaves behind. Each episode gathers a category of the once famous, person by person, and tells, with warmth and honesty, where their stories went. It is made for anyone who has ever glanced at an old rerun and felt that small, aching curiosity. Whatever happened to them? Disclosure. This program is an independent work of biography, commentary, and historical retrospective produced by Books, by Barron, and written by Baron Darby. It is built entirely from publicly available information. It is not authorized, endorsed by, or affiliated with any of the individuals profiled, nor with their families, estates, representatives, studios, networks, labels. All interpretations and opinions expressed are the author's own commentary. Names, titles, program names, and trademarks referenced remain the property of their respective owners and are used here for purposes of commentary, criticism, and historical discussion. Any errors are unintentional, and good faith corrections are welcomed.